Okay, so I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes, and then I'm going to let you all go to dinner, and I would love to hear, and hopefully I can start some conversations. I'm certainly not going to be ending them. I'm not going to be telling you anything astonishing. I have one or two ideas, and maybe you can help me refine them. Some of you may know me as the author of DrRacket Stepper, not to be confused with the macro stepper or the debugger. So how many of you, this is an interesting crowd. I know that Racket is often widely used in education, and many of you do teach, and many of you do not teach. How many of y'all teach people how to program? Yeah, okay, good fraction. How many of you know how to program? Okay, you guys are amazing. You guys are experts, okay? And I just want you to acknowledge how amazing you are, especially, all you at home. You're all amazing. And most of you learned how to program. How many of you learned how to program first? Feel like you really kind of like learned how to program in a classroom? Yeah, not a lot. Not a lot. I certainly did not. I did not learn how to program in a classroom. And so one of the fascinating things that I think that confronts many of us as we struggle to learn how to teach people is the fact that we ourselves were not victims of our own techniques. This was brought home to me very clearly when my oldest son, Alex, who's now a freshman in college, struggled through a 101 class taught by my own department. Oh, it was horrible. Oh, it was really hard. I was not, thank heaven, the instructor. In fact, I wasn't even very helpful because every time he would come to me with a question, I would preface all of my responses. Well, I would try to be disciplined and help him, and then after about a minute and a half, I would just explode at how horrible the pedagogy involved in the program was. But the simple fact is, it's really hard. To program. Okay, so in particular, there's a difference, and I think many of you already know this. There's a big difference between knowing something, being an expert in something. You guys are experts in programming, right? And in teaching that, right? So there's these two very separate pieces of this, which is understanding how your brain works, right? And then understanding how to make somebody else's brain do that thing, right? Like, you know what it's like to be you, right? But if you just tell somebody else what it's like to be you, it's a little bit like sharing like your pictures from the top of the mountain. You're like, oh, I'm up at the top of the mountain. It's awesome up here. Look at all the stuff I can see, right? And people are like, well, how do I get to the top of the mountain? You're like, I don't know, but it sure is pretty up here. I would say, generally speaking, this is, This is something that we sort of tolerate at the college level, I think, a little bit. Is the idea that once you get to the college level, you are learning from people who are experts in their subject matter, but maybe not experts in teaching it, which is why probably teaching programming belongs at the high school level. But we all know. Yeah. Anyway. The Common Core curriculum. I don't know. How many of you have any of you looked at the Common Core curriculum? A little bit in math in particular. It's really interesting because when I first came to the Common Core curriculum, I was super excited about it, and I felt that they had really, really clearly identified some of the habits, especially, let's say, in math, the habits of successful math people, right? And over time, I realized that wasn't at all the same thing as showing people how to actually get there, right? So they would say, oh, you know what, math experts have different ways of solving different kinds of problems. Right? And so what do? So then now they take these poor fourth graders, right, and they say, okay, great, solve the problem. Now, solve the problem in a different way. Oh my God, it just makes me want to cry. Okay, and I would have, anyway, all right, fine. A fascinating counterexample is provided by, phonics, right? So how many of you know about this debate about whole word versus phonics, right? Yeah, okay, so a bunch of you know this. All right, so I'll give you the short version. How do you teach kids how to read? Okay, so classically, there was this approach where we say, well, we're going to teach kids, how different letters sound, and then they're going to sound the letters out. That's fine. And then somebody came along about 30 years ago, and I don't know who this is, and they said, well, you know what? That's not how experts read. Right? They don't. They stuck in whole words at once. Right? And so what we need to be doing is showing kids how to do that. Right? And they should be guessing what the words are, right, from context, not sounding them out laboriously. Right? And as the example goes, if the word is donkey, right, and the kids guess, well, oh, the word must be horse, right? But then they just kind of guessed it from context and maybe from a picture. Then you say, oh, that's good, you're really close, right? But they're not really close. They're not close at all. All right, and so one of the things that we've learned is that, in fact, the ways that experts work may be very, very different from the right way to teach people how to do something. Okay, and the question here is in programming. Okay, so let's talk about programming a little bit. The fundamental problem that we're tackling here in the first year in programming is, I give you a problem, you give me back a program. Right? That's what programming is. And this is something that, in some sense, students have some experience with in math, although there's a fascinating gap there, because honestly, there's not that many places in the math curriculum where somebody says, find me a function that does this. I mean, maybe we do it for, okay, I know how to do it for parabolas. Oh, I know how to do it for cubics, right? But when somebody says, I want a function that's kind of high for a while, and then it goes down and stays low for a while, and maybe, does a couple of things. Well, yeah, piecewise functions, you don't really do stuff like that. We never really tackle that. I think, honestly, what I want to do here is give a brief aside and a huge shout out to the Bootstrap project, which I feel like is genuinely tackling that and doing a fantastic job. And if any of you don't know about Emmanuel Schanzer and Shriram Krishnamurthy and Kathy Fizzler and the work they're doing with Bootstrap, it's totally awesome. Sorry. Okay, so here's a problem. Yeah. Given a list of numbers, return true when one of the numbers is bigger than 20. This seems like the kind of thing that we would like our students to be able to do maybe at the end of, 10 weeks, 15 weeks, something like that. That wasn't a joke. Only funny when I don't mean to be. All right. So how do we solve problems like this? All right. So as experts, we know how to do this. You know how to do this. You can do this problem. All right, and that's because you have some structure. You have internal structure. You can say, oh, which one of these is that? Oh, I think it's maybe one of these kinds of problems, right? But you've got it all nailed down. That's fine. For others that might be a little more basic, maybe they're kind of going through a whole bunch of examples in their head and trying to find a pattern that kind of matches the one that kind of does kind of something like what they want. All right. So, what's the phonics approach here? I think. What's the phonics approach? Yeah. Well, sorry. I think the phonics approach, honestly, is the design recipe. All right. That's what we think it is. All right. I would love to see some. And I think some people are trying to do this, but I would love to see more analysis, right, about whether this is really the approach that leads to success. So the fascinating thing about phonics is, we came up with phonics, and then we had these years in the wilderness, and then people started actually comparing, oh, which works? Oh, look, phonics works better, right? And so we think that design recipe is like phonics, and I think that, well, I'd love to get to a place where we have a large enough student pool. Go out there and become professors and teach people how to program so we can have people that we can compare on. Let's follow the design recipe. The design recipe actually shows us how to solve this. Okay, so we start with, this is just a problem statement, but I'm going to use it as my purpose statement because I'm lazy. All right, and I'm going to skip step one. I'm sorry, I skipped step one. You're right, I didn't have space on this. Okay, it's in there. Yeah, I could, trust me. you want me to, I'm going to edit my slide? Okay, fine. I'm giving you is it a contract or a signature now? I'm sorry. All right, fine. And a header. Okay. Hey, I did some test cases. I did one thing right, at least. Okay. I've got a reasonable set of test cases. right? I've recognized that I'm going to recognize that this is a problem that accepts a list of numbers. I'm going to do the template step in a reasonable way, and then finally I'm going to fill it in. Okay, so I filled in all my program. All right, so I want you to look at this program for a second, okay? I want you to look at this program for a second. I actually don't really care whether it's correct right now yet. I want you to look at this program for a second, and now, how many of you feel like you could do a reasonable job of reproducing that program that was on the screen, given a text editor? I think a fair number of you could. Okay, what about this one? It's just the same stuff. I just put the pieces in a different place. Okay, so probably many of you know where I'm going with this a little bit. There's a classic study, and it turns out actually it's a whole bunch of studies going back to, I think, maybe 65, and somebody perhaps named DeGroot, who did some studies on chess positions. And in particular, the studies revealed that chess experts can memorize chess positions very quickly. But only some kinds of chess positions, right? Only chess positions that naturally arose, right? That chess, realistic, reasonable, possible, plausible chess positions. Those they could memorize and understand very quickly, right? And they could say, oh yeah, I'll set the pieces up like that. But then you show them something like this, right? And then, it's copying, and it's hopeless. Okay, so the challenge somehow is what's the difference? The difference is that when you look at this, right, you're not seeing like there's a semicolon and there's a space and there's an H, right? You're seeing there's a structure, right? Everything is kind of what you expect, right? It has a familiar form. Okay, all of this is to say that chunking, right, which is the term for this, right, there's limits on how many things you can juggle in your head at once, ideas that you can juggle in your head at once. It's kind of fascinating, actually, to observe the same thing happen in your own head when you are tackling a new code base. I don't know how many of you have started on a big new code base recently, taken a new job. I certainly had this experience when I started working on Rust at Mozilla. There's a period of months, literally months, when you're thinking like, I'm getting nothing done. You look at this chunk of the API and you're like, okay, yeah, I got that. Okay, and then you go over to this and you're trying to get something done and you go over to this thing and it's like, oh, I forgot the first thing already, and then I'm going to go back over here again. And after a while, you actually start building these abstractions in your head, right? And you start absorbing them and you give them good names, right? They have identities, they have meanings. Right? So once you associate this big thing with a particular meaning, then it's great. We can toss it around, you can stick it in your pocket, you can use it, you don't have to think about it. Okay. All right. So going back to students in programming. There's been a lot of thinking and talking recently. I know that Mark Gustial, who has a very influential column and is very big in the 6E world, has become very interested in this idea of notional models. And I'm not sure I really understand the difference between a notional model and a conceptual model, but notional model seems to have been the term that's kind of taken off. So it's what we're all working with now. And the basic idea is that you know how code works, right? I hope. I mean, maybe not, right? There's a whole sort of a natural language approach to things, right? Which says, oh yeah, maybe you learn to code like you learn to talk or you learn to walk. It's just like you kind of go bleh and bleh until things start working, right? But I hope not, right? I think, that's kind of, we want to leverage our higher levels of thinking there, right? So that people can actually, when they write some code, they can figure out, what's this code going to do, right? Imagine trying to go through your entire programming life without ever knowing, like, well, what's this code going to do? I don't know. Let's put some more parens in. Okay. I've actually had interesting conversations with some of my colleagues recently who insisted that there wasn't any such thing as a notional model, or that they didn't teach their students anything like a notional model, which seems insane to me. I think we do want to give our students a notional model. We want students to understand, how does a piece of code get evaluated? Right? They have to be able to reason about how their code is going to be evaluated. Right? And it turns out that our choice of notional model is really kind of tricky, because in particular, there are some very simple notional models which aren't very good notional models. And it's because often the simplicity of the model is in direct opposition to its utility. Okay? So one example, and I mean, everybody loves to, something like assembly language has a very simple model, right? But it's not probably the way you want to teach kids to program. At the other end of the scale, the lambda calculus is also a lovely and very simple model, and not what you want to use to teach students how to program. It's not. It's simple in the sense that it is very elegant and has maybe just one rule, maybe, depending on how you squint at it, just one rule. Right? But it's a little bit like trying to understand how a computer works at an atomic level, right? I'm not saying that atomic interactions are simple, but you can imagine a set of very simple interactions which give rise to a very complex behavior at a large scale. So you don't really necessarily want a simple notional model. You want the one that leads to understanding. And another interesting question for me, at least, is should students be able to write down the steps of evaluation? Most professors say no. I mean, implicitly, right? And I'm serious when I say like, okay, listen, I want a question on this exam. I want a question on this 202 exam that says, here is a program. What is the next step? Okay, and this makes I don't want to exaggerate, but I get a lot of pushback. I have never succeeded. I have never succeeded in getting this question on an exam. Obviously, I'm not pushy enough, okay? I'm loud enough. I'm just not very pushy. Teachers don't like the idea of presenting formal models to students, and the idea of asking students to actually say what comes next, what happens next, in a precise and gradable way. And one interesting approach to, one thing you might say is, hey, you know what? You're kind of thinking, you're living over there in the math world, but we're over here in the natural sciences world, right? We don't have firm mathematical models. Instead, we just kind of try to describe things. We come up with approximations to the truth, right? So we come up with Navier-Stokes, right, which describes to us with sufficient accuracy how things are going to work, right? So which should we go with? Do we go with like that kind of a model, or do we go with kind of a mathematically precise model where we actually have a rule? We say, yeah, look, here's the rule. Well, I'm over here on this side of the stage. And I think most of you are too. Okay. So with that said, we need some way of showing students how programs are evaluated, right? And the best answer I got for you right now is the stepper, and you're getting hungry, so I better show you the stepper quickly. Quick! Show me the stepper. Show this guy the stepper. Okay, you've seen parts of the stepper. I know you have. Certainly, okay, fine. Yes, we can embiggen. All right, so oh, so many things, so many bad things about the stepper. God, it's the bane of my existence. Okay, fine. For simple arithmetic expressions such as this one, stepper presents a very straightforward model, and one that you're very familiar with. You can use the arrow keys to go back and forth. At least you can on my version of Dr. Thank you very much. but we want to move beyond that, okay? Here's do we want to run it? I don't know. Yeah, we want to, sure. As soon as we start introducing even the simplest types of conditionals, I would ask, do we actually teach students like a set of reduction rules for a conditional? Do you? And you can test them on it? You said not on the exam? It is on the exam. Okay. Good for you. Good for you. I think that this is where we start to peel away from this notion of a reduction rule. So I'm sorry, let me say this. I haven't said this. Maybe I haven't said this, and maybe I should say this. The stepper, what the stepper does is the stepper presents the evaluation of a student's program as a set of steps, as a set of reduction steps in a semantics. It's not actually using a semantics, but that's an implementation detail that we don't care about right now. Hopefully, the steps in the stepper are consistent with a reduction semantics. That is to say, there's a rule for identifying the next expression to be reduced and for a rule for how it should be replaced, right? So the cond has a set of rules. Cond says, well, I'm not going to try to step through it here. I mean, you can see these rules, and you can go back and forth, and you can go back and forth. And of course, it works better if you actually think about what the rules are supposed to be. But when I look at that, it doesn't quite match my mental model of execution, not quite. It's not quite there, I don't know. Let's go back to this code, yeah. When I describe to somebody, if I wanted to describe to you how does a cond work, I would probably say like it runs down all the left-hand sides until it finds one that's true. And then it evaluates the one on the right-hand side. And is that exactly the same thing as providing you with a set of reduction rules? Depends on how you squint. Okay. But things get worse. And this is about the same. On some level, students do understand, they have been taught in 7th and 8th grade how application steps reduce. So what's the next step in the reduction of this thing? Right. Substitution, right? Everybody knows substitution. And I will say this. Praise America's elementary school teachers. Bless their hearts. They are doing this right. When you say to them, how do you evaluate a function? This is amazing. Okay, you can go to a 4th-year student in computer science and you can say to them, what's the rule that you learned in math class for how functions get evaluated? And even after 4 years of writing C code, they still say you replace the arguments in the body, right? Well, that's amazing. I mean, it's beautiful. That little piece of truth there, it gets preserved. And yet, I mean, okay, so now part of it is just I hate this interface. I really do. I'm sorry. I wish it were prettier. I wish it was more intuitive. I wish you could see clearly how one step moves to the next one. But still, beyond all that, there's another issue going on here. And it becomes even clearer when you go to the last example. Is this the last? Yeah, this is the last example. Okay, this is the big example. This is the example that we just had here. Okay, and so we're going to step through this. We're going to step through this thing. And I kind of buy it how green turns into purple. If I look hard, I can think like, okay, yeah, that green thing turns into the purple thing because it's an application rule, and so I'm going to substitute in the body and I'm going to put in all the things. Okay, big problem number one. This is something that Sriram identified in his 2018 paper. Students have problems doing this on paper, substituting in big terms everywhere. Right? In 7th and 8th grade, you're substituting in 7 for every instance of x, right? I mean, 7's got 3 strokes instead of 2, but really, it's not much of a push. But these are big terms, okay? I don't like that, and I don't know, I mean, I can sort of imagine how to do it better. But that's not, I think, the biggest problem. The biggest problem happens when we make a recursive call here, okay? And so I can wave my hands here for the students, and we can say, oh, look, see how the contexts are building up, okay? And maybe we can see how the contexts are, I mean, okay, you guys, y'all are the students that could understand how the contexts were building up, all right? And you're here because you're good at that kind of thing, right? But most of the people in our classrooms aren't good at that kind of thing, right? They're in computer science because it's a good career. You make a good salary. Please, can you just teach me how to program, please? Sorry?
How do you spell C?
How do you spell? I don't know. How do you spell C? Touche. Okay, so, sorry, speaking of the microphone? Okay. Here's what I think is the issue here. Students have an attachment to the code. They have some notion of identity associated with the code that they wrote themselves. And if you present them with the code that they wrote, then they understand the notions of location in the code that they wrote. What we're doing here is we're radically transforming and turning their code inside out and putting it inside itself in ways that can be weird and surprising to them. Okay, so now it certainly sounds like what I'm basically arguing for is a change back to like the same old like classic debugger stack-based, like thing that everyone's had for a bajillion years, all right? But I'm not, because in fact, it turns out that there is one thing that we have that they don't. This is where I'm going to go back to this. This is just an idea. This is a twinkling in my, oh, you want to listen to Victoria Falls? No, actually, that's not a good idea. I'm easily distractible. I'm sorry. It's a problem. Okay, let's run the slideshow again. Okay. So here's a thought. If you understand, let's say you want to understand how many of you have explained how the length function works to students who are uncomfortable about recursion? Yeah, maybe not that many of you. I certainly have repeatedly, right? I can like beat you over the head with the stepper. I can say like, look, it works. See, step, 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 ta-da! And it's it's not that compelling. I suppose you could make the case, yeah, all right, fine. What you really want them to understand, and they're never going to believe it until they genuinely see this, is that, well, it works for empty lists. And you can usually get them to, they're like, well, you're right, because then I'm not using that weird other part of the function down there. Yeah, sure, it works for empty lists. Yeah, fine. Okay, but if it works for an empty list, right, does it work for a list of length 1? Oh, well, okay, and then we're going to walk through that, and then, yeah, it does. Okay, and then, oh, if it works for a list of length 1, there's genuinely no way to believe that the length function works without constructing an inductive proof in your head. Okay, so why don't we actually show students that? All right, so this is pure mock-up fantasy land. But what we have, right, what we have that other settings don't is we have a relatively purely functional setting. In particular, right, what we can do is we can take the run of the program and we can decompose it, right, into smaller, purely functional calls and actually reason about them from the smallest to the largest, rather than reasoning about them from the largest to the smallest, right, as recursion typically does. I think that one of the fundamental obstacles, one of the reasons that for loops are often seen as being more friendly is that in some sense they start naturally at the small and go to the big. Okay, so what I'm suggesting is I have a function that's adding things up, right? Right? So does it work for the empty case? Well, yes, I can see how that works. All right. Now, how does it work for the one case? What I really want to do here is I want to step through this one. I want to step through the second one. And when it gets to the recursive call, right, then I can just do the little jump over thing, right? Because we already agreed that that one works. We're building an inventory of believed facts. All right? And if you believe that thing at the top, then you can believe this, and then you can believe this. Okay. So, does it actually work? I don't know. Let's try it on that example we had before. It turns out that there were some bugs in that program. It didn't really work. So in particular, is there any numbers bigger than 22? Was supposed to be true in that list, and it wasn't. Right? What was the problem? You like that? I've been working on that cackle. That was see, I've been in Europe, and that's, yeah. Sorry, I don't know where I'm going with that. Cackling. Let's try stepping through this program. Yeah. So, in particular, I'm going to, I'll tell you what I have not implemented at all is, sorry, here's what I really wanted to do. What I wanted to do is this. What I really want to do is to take a look at that list. I'm sorry, Command G down. You're like no time. We're done. We would be done now, is that right? What I really want to do is take a look at this. Okay, so here's what I'm proposing. What I'm proposing is take a look at this and find the bug on this screen. Where's the bug? Where do you see a bug on this screen? Yeah. The third one. Okay, the first one is right. The second one is right. The third one is not right. I want to look specifically at the stepping of the third case, right? And I want to just step over the recursive call because I believe in that one, right? That one's going to work. Okay, so let's see what happens there when I try that. Third one, something like that, right? Okay, so we step and we go. Okay. Okay, so. Now, next is what I would like to see in one step, and I'm sorry I haven't hacked that in. So has big number, cons 18 empty should just reduce to false, right? Yeah. So let's just jump to that. I'm sorry, forgive me, and that's going to turn out to be a false. Okay. And false. Okay. Yeah. Check expect false. Oh yeah, and is going to come out. Oh look, wait, I didn't want an and, did I? Darn! Didn't want an and. I wanted an or instead. There, that was the first thing. Okay. Or. Okay. Now does it work? It doesn't. I'm sorry. We're out of time. What's the other problem? Okay, I accidentally swapped the greater than 20 thing, right? I wrote greater than 20. That's a really common mistake. Students make that all the time, right? Greater than 20, right? Greater than 20. Yeah, okay, fine. And you're going to find that bug in the same place. Okay, so, yeah. Any questions? Sam, I did the buttons back and forward. Yeah, and the arrow keys too. I noticed. There was some actual good that came out of this. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, for, yeah. Thoughts, questions? I'll say honestly, I mean, what I'd really like to do is to, Yeah, what I'd really like to do is to hear from people about ways that my proposal is terrible, and hopefully accompanied by ways of making it less terrible. I'd also love to hear volunteers for people to do lovely, beautiful interface work. I cannot believe that was with Big Bang. I'm sorry, I just reminded everyone of your talk. What am I thinking? What an awesome talk that was. Okay, I can't believe that was Big Bang. I'm sorry. So I would really love to talk to you about ways that you would like to make that interface better, specifically for teaching purposes. So anyway, thanks.
And I think we should have these conversations over dinner. But before you clap for John, I want you to understand that John is actually doing a huge thing for all of you at this very moment. John is actually the release manager for Racket. So every time a new release comes out, he's the one who's responsible for making sure that the builds get made on all the different platforms, making sure that they get tested promptly, making sure that all the correct repositories are tagged with the right branches. This is something that Vincent did for an extremely long time, and John has now taken over. So,
can I tell you what I'm doing better than Vincent is? Yeah, the big difference between me and Vincent is that when Vincent was doing it, it just kind of worked, and everything was quiet and nice and normal. And now that I'm doing it, it's the subject of a great deal of attention. So that's a big win.
Thank you so much.